Today I'm going to talk about this early career reviewer training in a sense that we developed, especially in last year. And then we also had two workshops happening this year, one in January and one just a couple of weeks ago in September. And yeah, so you've already heard a bit about me, so I don't have to present myself. Sorry. Okay, here we go. So why this project? So why did I decide to be interested in this project in general? So kind of the background of it is, of course, that we all know that the number of journal submissions has been growing way faster than the number of researchers that are kind of produced in the system, and like PhDs coming out of the system and continuing research and being able to perform peer review. So because of that, and also because of the fact that more like senior researchers always feel that they're too busy to perform peer review, more and more of the work started to trickle down to early career researchers, even like PhD students that are asked by their professors maybe to take over some of the peer review work that they are supposed to do. But they often feel like they do not have the skills to do this work because, as we also know, that peer review is currently learned on the job. You're just thrown into the water and have to start doing it because it's expected of you as a researcher to do this kind of free work for the journals. And there is no formal training on peer review in any curriculum that I at least have been involved in. So that's kind of the background or the motivation of the project. But as was also mentioned in the introduction, is that I am, I love teaching. So I'm also involved a lot in teaching, especially junior researchers, PhDs, and postdocs in good research practices. And there we talk a lot about peer review too, and the system of peer review. And I realized that the junior researchers feel like they do not have the skills, or they are not empowered to do this work. While I think that there's a lot in it for junior researchers to kind of see behind the scenes of the system and do this work too. So kind of profit from it and not just see it as a burden. Yeah. So that's how the project kind of started. So this is this early career reviewer. So we just decided to change the R of ECR into reviewer. So that's why it's ECReviewer. And the goal is really to empower early career researchers in conducting peer review for maybe the first time or second time, or like just one of the first times. And out of this project, we developed or put together this platform that you might already have seen. And on this website or platform, there's also a guide to conduct peer review. And then after we developed the guide, we started thinking about how to bring this really to the ECRs and also conduct these workshops. That's what I'm talking about. But for me, this is kind of the start of the project because I have a bigger goal with this, where this is actually heading. So my long-term goal is to kind of integrate early career researchers more into the Swiss academic context. So kind of at one point move away from review of these scientific articles, which are just a little puzzle piece in the academic system, and maybe get junior researchers also involved in being experts on panels when it comes about like decisions have to be taken on who gets funding or who is being hired at an institution as a professor, etc. So to also kind of give them the skills and the visibility to start being involved in these decisions. Also. So the idea will be to later on, once this is all established, to extend this platform into a platform really for and with junior researchers in mind, and also bring them visibility and have maybe eventually little profiles of junior researchers who are trained in reviewing and kind of critically reviewing a paper, but also maybe a proposal for funding. And that then, for example, the Swiss National Science Foundation could contact and ask to be on the panel. So that's the long-term goal, but I'm going to put this aside for now, but just so that you can put it into context. So this specific project was initiated by the Swiss Statistical Society, where I am the vice president, but that doesn't mean anything, it just sounds good. And then I am, as you heard, at the Center for Reproducible Science and Research Synthesis at the University of Zurich. And my collaborator on this project is at Unidistance in Brieg in Switzerland, and she's the president of the Swiss Statistical Society. So that's how it came about. But since we initiated the project, it got more and more interest, so also internationally, so that's why I'm here, but also within Switzerland. So the second workshop, for example, we organized together with the University of Bern and the Swiss Reproducibility Network, funded the coffee breaks and stuff like that. So that was really nice. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into how we developed this guide. So these are my two collaborators in the first iteration of the guide. So one is Corinna Martarelli, who's the president of the Swiss Statistical Society, and then Flora Logos, who was a research assistant with me last year and did most of the work to get this guide online. Okay, so the motivation, or the methodology for developing the guide. So we actually started with defining our target audience. And since it was a project that was initiated by the Swiss Statistical Society, we had to kind of like target it a bit so that it was kind of funded by the society to target, to make it kind of a statistical literacy project and focus a bit on the statistical aspects of papers. And therefore, we targeted non-statistician junior researchers in empirical and quantitative research fields that can range from psychology to political science, or anything that is about like just in empirical research. And then the junior researchers, or ECRs, we defined as being researchers at some career stage between early PhD and early postdoc. So generally anybody who has limited peer review experience. So I guess also more senior people can actually profit from this guide and the workshop. So how did we go about developing this methodology? So Flora started collecting all kinds of open educational resources, but also other things that are open. So also papers, for example, and all kinds of guidelines that we could find to answer specific questions in a sense. So one would be, what are the characteristics of a good peer or good review, including constructive and critical feedback. So I'm very happy also to get more resources in the talk before that I already kind of copied into our resource box. Another one is, what are principles of good research practices and open science? So this includes things like pre-registration or adherence to study protocols and data sharing and stuff like that. And how can we incorporate these principles into peer review? So if we as a peer reviewer care about these things like good research practice and open science, how can we bring this into our peer review? And then, of course, because of the statistical literacy aspect of the project, we also looked into resources on the appropriateness of statistical or analytical plans of a study. So anything from power calculation to actually the statistical method that was used to answer a certain research question. And then the interpretation of the statistical analysis and the results to make sure that there's no like spin in the discussion. Yeah. And then the hard part came. So first there was a lot of stuff that Flora found, and there's a huge Excel sheet. And then the idea was to kind of synthesize all the information into a first version of the guide and like crystallize what is really important in peer review. So we essentially started, so this is also what is currently in the guide. So there's a lot of information on what peer review actually is, or what are the responsibilities of peer reviewers, what is kind of the idea and why is it the gold standard in science. And then also some information on the open science principles and what they are, and different types of research, because it depends. yeah, it depends on the type of study that is conducted, like which type of review you would do or which things are important in the peer review. And then we put together a section on, well, which is actually very, very important. That's something I didn't really think about when we started this project, to give a bit of guidance on how do you even take the decision of whether you want to accept or reject a review invitation. How can you decide based on an abstract and maybe author names whether you are like expert enough or whatever, or what does it even mean to be expert enough to conduct a review? And then we have a long section on the review itself, including things like to consider before you start the review, general recommendation, and then guidance for the different sections of the manuscript. And then stuff on how to write the report and how a report should look like, ideally. And then what's next, also things like second rounds of review that you might be invited to. And then once we put together this first version of the guide, we had a little expert seminar. So these are the names of the people that were part of this expert seminar where we presented the guide, and then they gave feedback. So they got kind of a PDF version before the seminar, and then we had like a long discussion about different aspects and things that they believed should be included. So we had people from different career stages, some more junior researchers. We also had representative of the Swiss National Science Foundation in the seminar because of my longer term goals. So I want to get these people on board and think that this is a good resource and a good platform. And yeah, so then after the seminar, we went back to our guide and kind of integrated this feedback into the final PDF version of the guide. And then Flora did a lot of work to get this into a more interactive platform and have it as a HTML thing online. Okay, so that's the guide. So you have the link in the chat too. And yeah, so I mean, I'm not going to open it now just to make sure that I'm not going to lose the slides. But essentially, this is how it looks right now. So this is already the actual guide, because there's these other little tabs, like for example, peer review. So this is kind of the explanation of what peer review is. And then you have the guide and the different sections, or like the different sections of the guide, essentially. But I'm already mentioning here that this link will change because if you see in the link, there's my name, and I want this resource to be owned by the world and not by me. So we're moving now to another platform to make it really more of a resource that should belong to everybody, and everybody is invited to contribute to this resource. And yeah, but I'm going to come back to this later on. Okay, so now I'm going to quickly talk about this peer review workshop that we had then after developing the guide. And so we had two successful workshops. One, as I said, in January at the Unidistance, and the other one in here now at the University of Bern in September. So the two pictures are from the workshop in Bern. So you see a lot of happy faces. And generally, I feel like the feedback was always very, very positive. These workshops were also completely booked out. So I think that just shows that this is really filling a gap in training, and yeah, junior researchers are really, really interested in the stuff we're talking about, and always very happy after these workshops. So how did we set it? Oh, wait, first, like the workshop objectives. So it's like kind of the main objective, I guess, is just to understand what peer review is, how it works, what are the values, the limitations, and responsibilities. That's pretty straightforward. Then this big question that I didn't realize how important it is, like know when to consider, like what to consider when you decide to accept or decline a request. And then receive these practical tips and advice from senior reviewers. So in the first workshop, there was me and Corinna, who were like the senior reviewers, to give also our experiences with peer review back to the participants, which I think is very valuable. And then in the second workshop, we had three. So I was one of them again. And there were two senior researchers from the University of Bern who also acted as these senior reviewers and give their perspectives, because they were very different to some degree to mine, which was also very interesting to hear, I guess, for the participants, because the way I am doing research, peer review, is like, it's probably not like, it's not a wrong way, but it's not the only way. And what I've been talking about, and which might also be in the guide, is like how I see it, and my other collaborator Corinna, how we see peer review. But since it's not a hard science, there's not a right way to do peer review. So that's why it's so important to get these different perspectives. And then I guess the most important objective of the workshop is to actually gain confidence in reviewing, because we integrated a joint peer review of an actual paper into the workshop. And yeah, to kind of do this together as a group, again, I think is very valuable for junior researchers to realize they can actually do this, and they have something to say that is important. So regarding the format of the workshop, I think this is the right word. It's a blended learning approach. So the idea is that there's some self-study before coming to the in-person part of the workshop. And in the self-study, the participants are asked to study the guide. So they get the link to the guide and then study it themselves and think about any feedback that they have or questions that remain. And then they also receive a manuscript to read and prepare like first impressions of this manuscript. And then we come together in our like classroom setting. So this was a workshop that was going on from both workshops actually from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So about 6 hours, including a lunch break. And it started with, in the morning, with like a lecture and a Q&A on the peer review guide, again, to share a bit of experiences of what kind of experiences do the participants already bring, maybe also from the author side of peer review and receiving peer review, but maybe less giving peer review. And then, yeah, just sharing experiences essentially. And then after lunch, the biggest chunk or the heart of the workshop actually happens, which is this joint review of a real manuscript. And that's actually the hardest part to organize, which is how the heck do we get these manuscripts? So we, in the description of the workshop that I'm also sharing later on, we, I think, talk about the three approaches. And the one that we used in the first workshop was the one that we just contact editors after receiving a peer review invitation. So both me and Corinna, we received peer review invitations before the workshop. So we just contacted the editors and we're like, hey, we're organizing this workshop. Would it be okay with you to use this particular manuscript, share it with the participants, and do the review together with the participants? And we were lucky, and these editors were okay with this and positive about it. There were, of course, some reservations by at least one, and a lot about like how they gave us a lot of sent a lot of emails about how to make sure that this is confidential and stuff like that. But generally, it was very positive, a positive experience. And if you were to try and organize something like this yourself, I guess this specific approach has the pro that you have complete control over what manuscript you're going to use in the workshop, whether it's a manuscript that actually works well, whether you have the expertise to be the senior reviewer on this particular manuscript, and you have the direct implication of the peer review that you're going to do together with the participant on whether this particular manuscript is actually going to be published and the type of feedback that the authors are going to get. So this is very attractive for participants. However, there's a big contra, which is you have to live with this uncertainty. It's highly unpredictable. So if you decide to schedule a workshop in January, end of January, and you never get any peer review request, and then you don't know what to do. So that's, of course, a big problem with this approach. But I guess if you're doing this, you might also know how many review requests you get over the time of a month. So yeah. The second approach that I believe is the nicest is to partner with a journal. We actually tried this for the first one and it didn't work out, and then that's why we had to rely on this approach. But for the second workshop now in Bern, we partnered with Psychological Science that was already mentioned. Like, this journal was already mentioned in the first talk, and we actually had a wonderful editor to help us with this, which was Simin, which was also mentioned in the previous talk. So she was, of course, very helpful. We had a lot of discussions with her on how to organize this properly. And yeah, so it is predictable in the sense that you will receive some manuscripts. So this was something that was really discussed before, what type of manuscripts we should receive and when, and that really worked out very well. And you also have the direct implications of the review. So again, it's very attractive for the participants. However, I guess we were lucky that we had such a good editor to talk to, and who also knew some of us already, who knew what type of manuscripts we would need. But it depends, of course, on the handling editor, how appropriate the manuscripts are going to be for the workshop. And it's also going to be hard to say, well, now I don't want this, after you had all these discussions and signed agreements, etc. So yeah, that's kind of a contra, I guess. And then the alternative approach, if none of the others work out, there's, of course, or it's easier also to organize, is to just use open peer review platforms, or engage in post-publication peer review and just take an article that you know and like or don't like, and then put together like a pub peer review or pub peer comment with the participants. With the open peer review platforms, I think what I would suggest there is, for example, if you were to use like F1000, where you can see the whole history of the peer review. And I think this would be very nice to just use, for example, the first version of the article that was submitted. So that's possible with these platforms. And then you can also go through the actual peer reviews that you might see in these platforms to discuss with the participants, which is also very nice. The pro is, of course, that you have complete control over the manuscripts you're going to use in the workshop. It is relatively easy to organize. I mean, you have to read a lot of papers and maybe also reviews, but it is kind of, if you do the work, there's less uncertainty. However, the contra is, of course, that there's no direct implications. So there might be implications after a pub peer comment on the article. It could be retracted, or you could get feedback, I don't know, an answer from the authors. But it's, again, not predictable whether this is actually going to happen. And therefore, it might be less attractive to the participants. And the other thing, I think, which is more important, is that you miss this behind the scene of like interacting with publishers. So what I did in the workshops is that I would show the participants like the invitation email, etc., the contact that I had with the editor, looking at the platform that you're going to use to submit the peer review. So they see this kind of behind the scene, which you don't see if you're using this alternative approach. Okay. So now it's your turn. So you listened to me talking about this enough now that you're ready to organize your own workshop at your institution. But I also would like to invite you all to look at the guide, and you might have feedback. There might be things that you don't agree with. As I said, there is no right way to do peer review, and it's just the way I and my collaborators saw the world. But you might have feedback. So I invite everybody to contribute to this guide. And as I said before, it's currently still on our University of Zurich GitLab under my name, which is going to change. So we're going to move to gitlab.com so that everybody, wherever you're sitting, you can contribute. So that's happening right now. I just had a research assistant starting this week to do exactly that. And then we're also working on a contributor structure to onboard possible contributors and see how we can give them credit for different things that people are doing. But generally, if you don't want to contribute like that, you can, of course, just fork this GitLab repo and build your own. Completely fine. So it's published under a license that allows you to do that. Because there's lots of aspects also of peer review that are still missing. So for example, there's a mention of open peer review, but there's not much context on how, again, like junior researchers can profit from this model. There's, I think, nothing actually on post-publication peer review, or again, maybe just a mention. But that should also still change. So if that's something you want to contribute, feel free to contact me and or wait for me to post about the new structure. And yeah, and just get onboarded. Then regarding the workshop, as I said, the guide is free to be adapted and used for your workshop. Just take it. And there's also a description of the early career reviewer workshop on the OSF. So it's a description we wrote after we organized the first one. And I also plan to integrate parts of the description of the workshop directly on the platform so that it's not two different entities in a sense. And yeah, so if you want to do this and you're not sure, just feel free to contact me if you still need like kind of slides or other material or contacts, or yeah, just contact me if you have any questions and want to organize such a workshop. Yes, that's all. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for being here, and I am happy to answer any questions.